by the 9 and 4, I welcome you to this, The Tale Thus Far, wrapping up a season's storyline in one compilation. I do hope you enjoy. As I looked up from the mass of letters and maps spread across my table, I noticed with a small amount of annoyance that the lights were slowly guttering out and the fireplace was cold, without any embers left glowing. I had spent the entire day going over the information that was now laid bare on my table and had lost track of the time. As I loaded the fireplace and I lit it, I adjusted the controls on the fireplace to absorb most of the heat and only a little of the light, as the night's cool air was pleasant and I needed to recharge my modest cabin's energy reserves while still being able to see what I was doing. Once the fire was again going and the lights around the cabin lit again, I turned back to the cause of my distraction, and the fact that in but a few hours, dawn would be breaking and I would be called upon to answer the riddles that these sheets of vellum and linen presented. After centuries of enjoying a quiet retirement, despite all my efforts to remain that way, someone had not only found me, but managed to get a package delivered, a small fiddle case. Within this box, there was a job offer meant for my eyes, and only my eyes, as this box would ensure. Each fiddle case was of course unique, despite any outward appearances. Indeed, the Fiddle Touch made sport of making as many possible variants of their puzzle boxes as they could, while maintaining outward appearances of similarity, all the better to confuse would-be interlopers. But I knew this particular box well. For centuries it had been how I had passed objects of value or intelligence to the relevant agencies of the Criterion government. However, the last time I had seen it, it had contained my resignation. This time, however, it was filled with the various data and maps of locations within the Wild Realms, a series of targets for various styles of operation. Also, there were offers of pay and remuneration for each target, and they were most generous packages indeed. Whomever was behind this, they had plenty of coin, and seemed intent on securing my services, as the last item to come out of the extra-dimensional storage space made very clear. It was a large pistol, Christech, and of a make not seen in the realms for a very long time. Picking it up and looking it over, I was still amazed that any examples, or more likely replicas, had been able to survive this long outside of a museum when I saw it. A deep mark in the base of the barrel, as if it had been used to catch a blow in some desperate close quarters brawl. I softly gasped in dawning recognition. This was not a replica as I had thought, but an original piece, and a particular one at that. Again, not completely impossible, but not in any way a reasonable thing either. Just another show of wealth and power behind this venture, as well as a sign that they knew how exactly to grab my attention. Whoever this was, what they wanted was clear, and it was an understandable thing for anyone who was aware of the greater situation of the realms. The Wild Realms were a treasure trove of ancient lost artifacts and new resources. While all the sovereignties were now forbidden from further colonization and exploitation, it had not stopped those independents from setting up teams to do the work for them. While the hunters normally would be the venue for this kind of work, the same decrees that had brought the spread of colonies to a near halt also forbid the large-scale employment and deployment of the hunters within the Wild Realms without proper cause. That cause was almost always anti-piracy in nature, but it had been a rarity over the last few centuries. Therefore, independents were needed, but those were not exactly common, as the hunters served as the cross-realm standard for adventurers and specialists of all stripes to ply their trade, and nearly everyone was a member. So, someone was fishing for a highly skilled and almost totally unknown or forgotten about independent team, and was laying quite the golden platter before us to acquire our services. Nothing in these documents lent any clarity to what the eventual goal would be to justify a cost like this, so I had to assume that would come later. But what was on offer was more than enough for me to send the call out to the rest of the gang. Granted, the captain and the LT were already in town, as they were the ones to deliver the package after it had been left for them to find. I'd imagine that the little ones would have made it into town by midnight, and Navcon and his node would not be far behind them. It was anyone's guess whether Masnoa would answer or even show, for she had always been a wild card. None of us had bothered to join the hunters after we had retired. While the rest had been of a mind to do so, I was not. I was done with the great game, and had retired a full 30 years before the rest had. They had tried for years to get me to come back to the service before they too left, and for years they tried to get me to join them in going to join the hunters. I had refused, and I wouldn't have even bothered to sound the call if it was not for this pistol in my hands. Finding the box and using it to deliver the offer was one thing. Enough coin could make rather unlikely things become rather common. However, this weapon was not just an unlikely find, not some matter that could be solved by paying the right folks to look the right way or calling in favors with a local noble or lord. As far as I was aware, there had not been many of these to surface in all the years since the reign. Perhaps 3 or 4 at the very most, and none of them were functional. This is not only functional, it's fully functional, which spoke to a conclusion I truly hoped was just my paranoia. It spoke of the family, or the other gods, being involved. By the dreamer, is that what it looks like? Masnoa's soft voice caught me off guard. I think there is a partial example of one of those in the Great Temple's museum. None that I've ever spoken to have been able to even speculate what the full capacities of those were. Sitting in the corner, deep in the shadows, she was still as easy on the eyes as she was as hard to get an eye on if she chose to hide herself. I didn't even bother to ask how long she'd been there. Yes, a pre-fire multi-discharge rotator pistol. And by the family, it feels fully functional. All the chambers and conversion channels are intact, and the focus array is spotless. It was hard to keep the awe from my voice. Might be the only one of its kind left. Quite the enticement, Sarge. But the important question is, will it work? Her eyes were intense. You know we have all been waiting patiently for you to sound the call. Kriston Adelishness does have its perks. But if you're getting the gang back together, it has got to be for more than some pea shooter from the Wars of Feather and Scale. Her tone held nothing but dismissal for what was in fact a relic of the lost past of the Kristons. It is not some pea shooter, it's... I stopped myself. Masnoa's keen wit had not dulled a bit, and she still knew how to get to me. It's a sign of what kind of individual is offering to back us. I ended with a calm smile, and I could feel that familiar tone and demeanor returning after ages from the back of my mind. Yes, it's a sign that even after being the only person to turn down the greatest honor that we can receive in the service of the Criterion House Advanced Division, or any branch of the service for that matter, there is still a vested interest in your services from someone with massive reach, even with the reason for your retirement. The force of the words came not from how she said them, but that she knew the words to use at all. I was in shock. How? Don't fret, Sarge. I'm the only one who knows. No, I'm not going to tell the rest. I'd relaxed. This was not a matter I ever wanted to visit again. Perfect memory is often a pain as a gift for the ageless. But if you're going to convince the rest that you are truly back in the game, you'd best have some reason for them that they will buy. Is that why you are here? To see if I'm really back in? You called, and I am here. I made a vow to you and the rest of the team. Well, in that case, you can start on breakfast. The others will be here soon enough, and I need to get this mess organized. We are going to have work to do. This board has been laid out, and it would be rude not to take this offer with some grace. Smiling wryly, she moved with her typical smooth grace, but with an alacrity I did not recall her possessing, moving from where she had been sitting to the kitchen in a blink, setting out pans and pots and humming a song softly. By the time she'd be done preparing breakfast, the rest would be arriving, and I would begin to lay out what was being asked of us and what we were being offered. Then the debates would begin, with each adding their own view and challenging the view of others. By the time we finished dinner, we should about reached an accord if things went well. And if things didn't, I'd have the matter settled by dawn. Of course, I didn't foresee an issue, judging by how quickly and snarklessly Masnoa had not only answered my summons, but went to do as she was asked. If she was this eager, the rest would at best posture and banter with their opinions of the matter, and at worst there might be a debate over the cuts. But if the coin on offer was as stated, I didn't see that as an issue either. Even as the sounds of breakfast caught up to the smell of it reaching me, I knew we would be on our way as a team again by noon tomorrow. Hey Sarge, hope you don't mind me saying, it's nice to see you back to yourself. You've missed us as much as any of us have, haven't you? Masnoa still had that look. She wasn't sold. But I couldn't lie. I have, and I hate myself for it. I also can't believe it's taken this long for me to start doing it all over again. Her sudden laugh was as wholesome as the meal she was now making, and I joined in that laughter joyously. Habit's a damn funny thing. That's what I was thinking as I saw my fellows arriving in the early dawn light. We'd all been out of service for centuries, yet the order of the people coming towards my cabin spoke of a clear rank and order of things. Not something of strict discipline, mind you, but of comforting familiarity. Of course, in the lead was the captain. Lindsay Stonewall had been an excellent mecher before she was sidelined early in her time with the advanced division. Now between her and the man close to her side, there wasn't a realm or operational theater that existed that they didn't have some sort of contact within. The taller man, logistical officer Lieutenant Card Glenn Spons, was a damn fine negotiator and diplomat despite his boyish and naive face. It doesn't hurt that he can also throw balls of Eldritch energy around when such matters turn sour, or he presses his luck a little too far. Following behind, in a 15-foot-tall bipedal walker with its 3 seats were the little ones. Piloting the walker would be Gaslula, a dwarven master of axes. He almost never spoke, or really seemed animated or alive, usually just staring off into space, seeing whatever horrors had broken his mind and spirit before we had found him. Now, we would see glimpses of who he was, normally in battle, but as well when he was working on his garden. Salo and Loso, the halfling fiddle-touched brother and sister, were the best damn field engineers I'd ever served with. I've yet to see a target they couldn't fortify or breach. The 3 of them were inseparable after Gas had physically recovered, and he took to protecting them very seriously. The Walker was one of their greatest creations, a multi-role builder and breaker, able to fulfill almost any combat engineering duty even in the thick of battle. At the end of this small convoy, Navco sat at the head of a large wagon, which no doubt held his node. By the looks of it, the node was at max for a Uniden, 36. Navco was a specialized form of Uniden, intended to fuse with and augment / control of vehicle systems in long-term fashion, eventually becoming a central part in the vehicle in question, mostly starships. They were very rare, as the mindset for a person to so restrict themselves in such a long, permanent fashion is rare, even among ageless machines. As they each dismounted and made their way into the cabin and the waiting meal within, Nav came to a stop, and a small sphere separated from his chest and floated down and blinked at me. His remote interface, with which he could be included in our talks, despite his mask not allowing him to come into the cabin otherwise. As I heard them all taking their seats and beginning to eat, and the banter that obviously was following, I could almost forget it had been centuries since we'd been gathered like this. Waiting for a few more moments, and soaking in the nostalgia of the morning, I prepared to return to a life that I had thought I had left far behind. After breakfast and catching up, I began, meaning to cut directly to the core of it. The offer's simple. 13 jobs done out of a list of dozens. Once it's done, we keep everything not covered in the task orders, plus the bounties for each individual job. No simple job would get us all out here, Sarge. Lindsay was not giving me any slack. Guess the year had worn on her patience a little. Signing offer includes an industrial-make survey vessel, with its 3 prospectors, for us to use as a base of operations, and it's ours after the contract ends. Think about it. We'd be back in the game, this time on our terms, and in the proper frontier, the Wild Realms. And you're going to tell me you're not interested? Her eyes widening answered before she could. What's the catch? Cardlin spoke up. Other than the fact that the list is going to change as we go, as many of these are sure to be time-sensitive jobs. There is one other thing. Until we're free from the contract, we're going to have an observer on board. The size that issued forth was, if anything, far less than I had expected. They must be itching to get back. It'll just be like the major we had till Huron 4. That memory still cut hard. Besides, it's a ship on offer. It's not unreasonable to expect them to want a friendly eye on board. We could use the contact with the client. To their credit, they only nodded their agreement to the logic. Quiet discussion ensued for a little while longer, ironing out details, before Captain looked up and asked, "So what's the order of battle going to be, Sarge?" I made a face, but then she continued, "This isn't the AD, and we all know what our job is. It was just like it was in the AD. It's to make it so you can get the job done. We were one of the best units for a reason. None of us let ego stop us from getting any assignment done. Part of that was recognizing who we actually followed and who we looked up to." As she finished, Gaz spoke. "Sarge makes the calls, Captain and Lieutenant work the brass. Little ones fix it and break it. Navi drives, and Massey hides." It was something that he had said whenever anyone asked him to describe our unit. Most people were unaware of how damaged he was, and we made it a standard practice to keep him and the twins away from outsiders as much as possible. He was one of us, one of ours, shattered mind or not. Miss Noah laughed as we all did at something that so well encapsulated who we were. I had never thought about being the leader. I was just the guy on the scene that had to make the call, which, of course, is what a leader is. I shook my head and raised my hands in defeat. "Fine, have it your way." The smile wouldn't stay out of my voice. "If we're all on side, I will use this gig coin to send you to our new home in the stars." With a flick of my wrist, I tossed the coin I was holding at a post on the porch, its shattering manifesting a gate to our soon-to-be base, just in front of Navi's idling wagon. I want a full examination and assessment. Then once you are done, I want you to do it again. I looked at Lindsay. Captain, you and LT are here after master of the ship and XO. You take the bridge and start there. Then looking to the little ones. You three, make sure nav is settled and fully installed before you go and check out those prospectors. And yes, one for each of you. And no fiddle work until I get back. Just make a list or something. I knew as long as I took care of my part with some haste, I'd be rejoining them before they were settled enough for the twins to get into too much trouble. Nav, as soon as you are installed and your node is active, I want every bolt, weld, and hinge of this ship checked. Full power distribution grid checks, the works. If you can think of a new way to check it over, do it. Our lives are going to count on it. I added as an afterthought. Expect hidden subsystems. As I think I've pointed out, there's a good chunk of coin behind this. The vessel may already have upgrades, and I don't want any surprises. Each nodded as I spoke to them, taking in the information and orders as if we had never stopped. Speaking of surprises, where are you going? To collect our observer. As Noah asked the question that was left in the air, the one they were all wondering. Yep, second gate coin, holding it up. Like I said, these guys are spending very heavily. I tossed this one at the wall. I'll meet you at the ship as soon as the final negotiations are finished. I expect a basic report by the time we arrive. By the way, that's your job, Mazzy. You keep them in line and on task until I get back. I realized that everyone was basically sitting straight up and at attention. Sometime between the end of the meal and now, we had all returned to habits that were ages older than they had gone unused. Now, by the family, get it done. Dismissed. By the family, was the call in return. As one, they got up and made their way to and through the gate in an orderly yet excited manner. And as I turned to walk through the gate I had created for myself, I smiled. Habits are funny things. Damn funny. Still smiling, I felt that slight shift as I crossed the line of the portal and entered into the room beyond. The difference in temperature, the scent of the air. For many, this is why crossing a gate or portal would elicit a shiver or a tingle. Despite knowing all this, I still shivered. It was a fair bit cooler in here. The room I had entered was of moderate size, but lavish in decor. Fine stone tables, inlaid with high-tech crisp consoles. On one of these was an envelope, with Sarge written in blocky letters. Opening it and looking within, I grinned and pulled out a reservation to Colores. Excellent! I was in Polaron, and getting to swing by the best bar in the city on the clock. Old habits returning again, I headed out to the street, checking the roofs as I walked, seeing the various roof runners and other messengers and ne'er-do-wells as well, running along the ledges. I took a direct route to Colores Bar, but I still took my time to take in the city. I haven't been here since before I left the service, and while there were many changes, the city, in all meaningful ways, was no different than the last time I was here. By the time I was walking into the front door of the bar, memories of long past had made their presence known, and had been banished as I now focused on the duty before me. Taking this observer along was not something we could get out of. They were going to act as a go-between for us and the client. However, they were also a potential spy on our operations. I doubted we had much to worry about on that front though, as if I was honest, a single person stood no chance against the lot of us. Unless there were God, I guess. I figured this observer would be some sort of noble's child, dare to live on the edge of danger out in the wildlands, but safe in the care of an elite combat team. One that prided itself on its lack of non-com collateral damage. We were damn proud of that. Sergeant, the deep address snapped me from my thoughts as I looked at the speaker and handed him my reservation. The supremacist took the paper with a slight smile as I responded. Still working the door, even after all this time. How many bets do you keep losing? Ignoring the barb. It's only been, 3, 4 centuries? His eyes glanced at the reservation, then back to me. Long time since you retired. Are you back in the game? After all this time? He slid the reservation into a box, and a soft mote of light hovered from the box to me. It was going to lead me to my private table. As I strode back, I softly answered, Yeah, looks like I am, but keep it on the low, eh? He nodded before looking to the next guest in line behind me. Following the light and arriving at my private table near the stage, I saw there was a fresh, unopened bottle of Chris whiskey on the table. Sitting down and grabbing the bottle, I read it. Farm Vine Brew of 52-6 12 12035 AV? Damn, that's almost as old as Criterion itself. Yes, heard it's one of the best. Can't stomach the stuff myself. I turned to the source of the voice and noticed he and I were seated opposite each other, and we were now in a large void of darkness. Just the table, our chairs, and an indistinct floor on which they sat. When one gets a private table at Calor's, it is private. The man was a dwarf in some sort of jacket and robe, which looked like some sort of New Earth fashion. Looked like his arm was missing, only a nub at the shoulder. It's when I noticed his eyes were very patient, as if he had seen a million people do this exact thing. When I was done, he spoke again. Master Sergeant Hahn, formerly of the Criterion House Advanced Division, known as the de facto leader of Mobile Action Detachment, Larnus Axis Dion Silius. I nodded. I wasn't quite able to keep the surprise off my face of him knowing my unit designation. That had to take some pull, as the AD was one of the most clandestine outfits in the service. He continued on. My formal address is that of Sir Rukta. I began to nod, only to see a fire flare in his eyes for a flash. However, I hate it, and I always have. Call me Nada. He split a wide smile and we got to business, discussing duties, expectations, and other such matters that a long-term operation was going to require. He was a contractor himself, hired as a neutral go-between for us and the client. Another layer of obfuscation, typical for work in the Wild Realms. But I would guess he was being paid just as well as we were. With how flexible he seemed to be on matters of my authority and what we expected of him. In less than 30 minutes we had sorted things, and we were now leaving the bar. I was still carrying the unopened bottle. We made for the nearest coghouse, as we would be using that to get to the dock where our ship and the rest of the team were. Nada had already made the arrangements for our passage to the dock where the ship was moored, and we were soon standing in front of a moderate archway, made of a gray dark metal, and a skin of silver energy that flowed across it. Nada reached over and played with the controls, causing the archway to flash, showing a blue-gray space beyond. As we stepped through, we were shifted at incredible speeds to the dockyard. Normally, cog space was traveled in some sort of vehicle, but for short hops, the sensations were all the danger one would face. We found ourselves on the receiving end of the trip at the dockyard, with a path to our ship already glowing before us. I took the lead, as was my habit. Habit. There was that word again. Finding the ship and getting on board took only Nada and I a few minutes, led as we were by the mote of light from the gate. As soon as I had gotten on board, I started to make my way to the bridge with Nada in tow. I was going to assign him to the bridge with the captain and the lieutenant, who were much better at handling the outsiders. Before I could make it more than a few steps, however, an image of Nav blinked into existence about 5 feet in front of us. "Sir!" He practically was squealing. "What is it, Nav? Report." "All report. ETA 2 hours. Basic report now. Ship is indeed upgraded in multiple ways. Storage, power, and all other systems are of a much higher grade than standard, or even luxury products commonly available." This was good, but not a surprise. "What's our FTL capabilities?" "We have a cog drive and a advanced exclusion field drive with a Type 3 core." "Excellent. What's our estimated cruising speed? And what can you get out of her right now?" "Standard specs for a surveyor is 30 to 50 foot cruising and 60 to 75 foot in a pinch." Not an unacceptable rate. Normally only the big boys get access to the tech for anything more than 100 foot. Nada caught it before I did, though. "Thought you said this was fully upgraded?" he asked. He was a keen one. "Indeed. Full checks are still underway, but I estimate a cruising speed of 50 to 60 foot and a top speed of nearly 110, if not a bit more." Consider myself stunned. Navi wasn't done there. "Additionally, our hull composition is that of uni-oni star alloy, with a thickness of 3 inches. My brain just stopped processing the implications of that, as well as the very large number that my mind tried to produce when calculating the cost of just a foot of this hull. Nada just whistled low. "Then what's our emission ratings?" "At rest, -4 to -3.85 at cruising speeds, -2 to -1.59. Estimate positive signal transmission at 68 foot." Still negative at that kind of speed would only be due to the massive absorption qualities that this hull would have. Speedy and sneaky. Someone knew what they were doing when they had this ship built. Almost like it was for us. "I'll be taking the foreman's office and control center. That's where you can give me your report. After I get our friend here settled on the bridge, of course, that is. What's the status of the little ones and the prospectors?" "Upgraded as well. Estimate cruise speed of 25 to 30, with a top near 50. As with greater ship, they also have upgraded sensors, shield generators, and hull. Full checks will also be done within 2 hours and be in my report. Little ones are busy going over internals of them. I have their tools with me. Most of them, at least." I smiled. His habits of keeping the twins from fiddling with everything in sight were still strong with Nav. Ever since the day they tried to upgrade his humor protocols. Seeing a ship skyride over arranging combat, and the writing being extremely long jokes about the origins of our foes, and what they had in common with a digestive tract of a foul-nine, was an experience I'd rather not have a third time. Twice was enough. "Very good. Carry on. Sarge out." With that, the image of Nav dissolved, and we continued our way to the bridge. I guess we would have been ready to make way in a few more hours, after everyone had made their proper inspection of our new home. Then we would have to choose our first destination, and begin our new life doing what we had always done. As I entered the bridge, I reached out and tapped the plaque with the ship's name. IRV Nightrock. I tapped it 4 times. A call of blessing from the family. I had done it on every ship I've ever served on. I smiled. Just another habit. "Sergeant on deck!" the lieutenant exclaimed, and both him and the captain stood at attention, wide smiles on their faces. "Oh, enough of that," I sighed. But when the smiles left, and they, if anything, stood straighter, I realized they were serious. Shit! I was really in charge. "Fine, at ease." Snickering, they went back to their duties. "This is Nada, our contact. I'm assigning him to the bridge. Put him to good use. Captain, what's her status? This ship is amazing. I haven't seen this level of sensors or equipment since the AD. Might be even better. That was high praise indeed. Have you linked with Nav? Captain shook her head. You should. This hull is Uniani. Well, he'll have a full list of the other upgrades in a few hours. Both her and the lieutenant stopped cold, with Carlin staring with mouth agape. Uniani? His eyes took a look at the guest, then at me, and then he spoke. Sarge, are we dealing with an HOD set? Nada raised an eyebrow, looking sideways at me, but did not comment. I also heard Masnoa walking up behind me stop instantly, and noisily. Well, shit, how to handle this? I laughed, and then I answered. Dear family, no. We are all way too long in the tooth for that. Unless you're actually some virgin babe, Cardlin, fresh from Tranus. The lieutenant is most definitely not a virgin. I made sure of that myself. The wicked look on the captain's face while looking at Cardlin made him flush red. That had instantly cut the tension that the question had raised. Masnoa then leaned in and whispered into my ear what the little ones had just reported to her. I was in shock and nearly asked her to repeat it, but I knew what she had said. The prospectors were equipped with Teltechian recover-link drives. This would allow us to flip a switch on the ship and return them nearly instantly to their docks, via the relatively unknown science of wormhole displacement. This tech was rare beyond belief. The Teltechians were very leery of sharing its secret with the rest of the realms, even in this truncated, massively limited form. Double test all those systems and make sure they're working properly. The ship has a lot of different tech in it. We need to make sure it's all going to work together and when we need it to. I will be in the Foreman Control Center. I need to start sorting out our list of potential first targets. How long until we're ready to set course, Captain? Lindsay glanced around the consoles. Nav is estimating full checks in an hour to an hour and a half. I've assigned quarters and made sure Glasgow has his room for his garden as well. The little ones will be getting settled in after they finish with the prospectors. And you say we can be on our way before morning if there are no unexpected hiccups. Her voice was full of pride. Where and when are we gathering for the song? 1800 in the control center. Until then, I want everyone working on making ready. I'll make sure all are in attendance, sir. Masnoa glanced quickly at Noda. I'll make sure Nada here finds his room. See you at 1800. On the eve of any deployment, there was a song that we always sang, an old sky shanty. Never had we made sail without singing it. In the end, another habit, and this one was one I had missed dearly. As Nada entered the command center, being the last to arrive, but still a minute early, he saw each of us, and the image of Nav stood around the central table. We were bumping and tapping the table in a bad, yet workable rhythm, slowly working up to the song's beginning. He was not one of us, had never seen this habit or even knew what it meant, but not a step to the table between the lieutenant and Gaslow, and began to pound his fist on the table in time with us. I smiled. This one would do just fine. As we sang and drank, toasting each other and sharing tales of one another's valor and guile with our newest comrade Nada, I began to plan what needed to be done before we made sail. Shifting in my chair, I felt that pistol that had been such a perfect temptation to bring me and mine back into this life that we were now preparing to jump back into. I realized one stop I would have to make. As things wound down after an hour or so, I thumped my mug on the table to get the attention of all. Folks, we'll be setting off at 0600 sharp. I want everyone at their stations no later than 0500. Final checks and preparations are to be completed no later than 0545. Until 0500, you are free to tend to any affairs you need to. I will be returning to the ship no later than 0430. Let's not have another frack spar, alright? Nervous chuckled around the table as the seriousness of my words rang through the drink and the merriment. Have I made myself clear? They all responded I had in a solid voice, and I stood to make my way to the translocation chamber, when Nav approached me using his comm drone and addressed me quietly. Sarge, I recommend returning to the ship no later than 0400. May I ask why? I kept my voice low, as Nav was not one to question a timetable without good cause. There are systems you will want to inspect personally before we make way. The extra time will compensate for that, without delaying our departure or roll call. Well, if I need to... The systems will not be ready for inspection until near then anyways, Sarge. So, where would you like me to set the translocation to? If you insist. Outside of Drunkia, I have a mighty thirst to quench. I said last loudly to a roarous response from the crew. As you wish, Sarge. The translocator is ready for you once you are ready. Soon finding myself outside of Drunkia, hearing the loud chorus of shanties and other drunken songs, I smiled. If I only had the time. Instead, I made my way to the skyship dock nearby, and found an elderly goblin sitting behind the desk. He looked up from whatever he was reading to address me. Sorry, son. No flights until the morning. I am aware, but I am also in need of immediate transit to Trennis Station 3, Level 4. I set my payment coin on the counter and slid it to him slowly. His eyes glanced down at my payment and back to me before he slid a hand beneath the counter, and I heard a series of clicks and other sounds of a mechanism being worked. A moment later, in the previously bare wall, portal opened to a dark room with only the moonlight illuminating it. Hearing the goblin slide my payment off the counter, I just chose to walk through the portal, as keeping such things open longer than was needed was not only a waste of energy, it was of little discretion. As the portal snapped shut behind me, I saw that I was in one of many such portal rooms that were around the grounds of Trennis, one that didn't see much use by the looks of it. Making my way out into the sky dock attached to catch a lift deeper into the city, I removed my gloves and tucked them into my belt. From the highly elevated sky dock, I could see vast areas that were in use for training, practice, and drilling. In the distance, I caught sight of an exercise just starting. Looked to be some Year 5s leading an assault to capture a flag from a fortified location and a numerically superior foe. The panel at the dock told me I had a bit to wait before my transport made its way here, so I watched the exercise and shook my head as the assaulting force opened their attack using mass bombardment of fog bank rounds, covering the field and the fortifications with a thick, dense fog that would most likely last until the morning sun burned it off. Even after all these years, the same tools kept being used, almost as if war changed little, if ever. It was a clever tactic, but as the defenders quickly showed, it was just the first steps in this dance. Their response was to deploy a number of magical arrows that landed after a high arc and began to glow a soft arterial red from their feathered ends. While not nearly enough to fully light the flog, their placement was not random, as to avoid the light and the shadows that they would cause giving away their position. The attackers would have to stay channeled into the darker, unlit areas. There was obviously some familiarity between these forces, as they were beginning to deploy the counter before the bombardment had even finished. as the transport pulled alongside the dock and extended its ramp for me to board. I saw a flare launch up, not 30 feet from the walls, scaring the hell out of the defenders and forcing them to bring their guns to a much closer range instead of aimed at the edge of the forest line where this attack was coming from. As I sat down, the pilot asked if I'd like to observe the test as we made our way in, and as things were just beginning to heat up, it appeared, I confirmed that I would. As we flew towards the center of Tranus, I watched a scattered, heavy fire rake the battlements from pockets in the fog, and one more salvo of fog banks landed behind and onto the wall. The impact caused the walls to collapse where the round struck. The defenders, to their credit, were very fast and kept the attackers pinned in these ambush positions, denying them the opening the damaged wall now offered them. Next, a mighty bolt of lightning then came down at the defenders, seeking to scour them from the breach and end this impasse. However, the defenders' own meta-assets countered and rechanneled this mighty bolt into the area where the flare had originally flown up, releasing a huge bloom of light and fire. But no screaming. We were less than halfway to our destination, when suddenly a color-changing light burst into life over the battlefield, signaling the victory of the attackers and the end of the exercise. They had somehow gotten the flag and gotten it back to their base in the chaos of that very short engagement, and seemingly without the defenders being any wiser. Not bad. Not bad at all, the pilot agreed, saying there were more than a few bright talents in the Year 5 tests right now. We made small talk for the last few minutes of the flight, before I disembarked and made my way into the vast complexes of tunnels and chambers beneath the city. Using secret passages that had not been used in some time, I soon found myself alone, walking down a long tunnel to a very old part of the city. As I continued to walk, the hall became dark and formless. "Why are you here, Professor? Why have you returned to this path?" A voice, hollow and shifting, asked. I slid my gloves back on, covering the ring of office that had allowed me to move through the city with such ease. "My business is my own. Now bother me no more, or face me." I had no idea who this was, but I hadn't the time for their pranks. I had a timetable to keep. "You face far worse than I, scale tipper. Far worse." And with that and a soft laugh, the hall returned to form, and I had to take a moment to calm myself. That name struck a tone of dread within me, and honestly, I wasn't ready for what happened next. "Professor Hahn? Is that really you?" A voice that was familiar yet forgotten snapped me from my thoughts violently. Whoa, easy there." Looking down the barrel of my service pistol, and at the end of the hall, I saw the tall, lean form of Professor Canar. The full suit of armor that contained his life force, or whatever that powered him, and smirked. "Good way to lose a faceplate, Canar." Began to lower my pistol, a smile making its way across my face despite my mock seriousness. "Indeed, but we both know you would never shoot a work of art like myself." He tilted his head to the side in mock preening. We had known each other for ages and knew the truth of each other. Therefore, there was only one reply that could be made. "True. Something so uniquely ugly must be preserved for all of time." The finely wrought plates of the armor's face scowled in response, before brightening into a caricature of a warm smile of welcoming friendship. I holstered my weapon and we made my way towards my original destination, my old office. And we spoke of what had gone on in Tranus in the years since I was recruited, all those ages ago. As I opened the door to my office. Magics inside cleared inches of dust and freshened the air that had gone unbreathed for ages, and made it appear as if it was the day I had left. Kanar followed me in, sliding the door closed and waving his hand, causing the walls to glow in a million or so pinpricks of light as he sealed the room so we could speak in private. "After all these years, what brings you back? You've been hiding out in Gavain ever since you retired. If you weren't going to come back then, why now?" I let my shock show. I hadn't considered Kanar would have tried to keep up with me after so long. "What? After you were recruited for Criterion, I tried to keep up with your exploits, only for you to vanish a few decades later. Let me guess. Covert operations?" I nodded. "Either way, you asked me to keep an eye on your things, and thus keeping up with you was required. No reason to do so if you're dead, after all." "I'm a bit ashamed. Never thought to reach out after I retired. Forgive me, old friend." He waved my words off as if they were a foul smell. "I won't hear of it. The Nine Wings sets us all on our own path. Now, what brings you back?" "Need my kit. Things are afoot, and I am no longer able to remain retired." The look he made was that of shock and disbelief. "Things that require equipment of that quality." I drew and I set the rotator pistol on my desk, to an immediate and visceral reaction. "9-4? How is that even possible? You said..." Worry and not a small bit of fear could be seen, even in his metal face. "Believe me, I know, but there it is. The how and why are hidden down a path I must now walk. And if this," picking up the weapon, "is where from and whom I believe it is, then the final secret that you've been keeping so well has been discovered or revealed. Not a likely thing to even be possible." He relaxed, understanding that I didn't suspect him of betrayal, but his expression was still filled with concern. "Either way, the presence of this," I slid the rotator into the holster at my back, "means my old kit is most likely going to be required. At least in the current age, it shouldn't stand out, even to most who think they know what they are looking at." At that, I walked over to the wardrobe and drew out the privacy curtain, before twisting a few of the handles and pressing on a few hidden panels, and opening the main compartment. Now that the extra-dimensional hidden storage areas that were open for the first time since I originally stowed my kit all those years ago. A bench to sit on slid out automatically, and I began to change. I set my weapons on the bench. As I pulled on the bodysuit and then the layers that went over it, I was instantly staggered for a moment, as all the various systems began to heavily draw on my own resources, in order to recharge their long-discharged power banks. A moment later, I was fine, and I finished by adjusting and donning my service pistol holster on my left leg, and then hooking my beater on the right side of my belt. I slid the rotator pistol back to its place on my back, and completed the whole affair by putting on the overcoat. Made of dragon scales and other very rare materials, very heavily enhanced, it provided great combat as well as utility enhancement and functions. I reached one last time into the wardrobe before closing it back up, withdrawing the large case that was used to carry the whole of my kit, as well as to repair and maintain it. Closing the doors caused the bench and the divider to withdraw automatically, and Kanar looked at me in my full raiment, and he softly clapped, the metal-on-metal sound softly ringing through the chamber. "Quite the sight, Professor. But allow me. And with a wave of his hand, I saw a soft glow move over me, and the few but unmistakable signs that revealed the truth of my gear's origin were removed, and left me with no mark as to the provenance of this gear. I sighed and released the tension I hadn't quite articulated. This was a relief. Many thanks. I hadn't quite figured out that one yet. How long do you have, Professor? I would ask a favor of you before you go. Plus, it would be a good way to make sure your kit is still fully functional. I need to be on my ship no later than 0345, Realm Standard. What do you have in mind? There was mischief in his tone. This should be good. Well, with the significant uptake in hiring of squad, company, and even as large as army-sized formation for use within the wildlands, mostly by various disaffected noble or merchant clans attempting to get a jump on the sovereignties during the colonization hold. There's a bit of a backlog on qualified assessors for higher level certification trials, particularly PCT assessors. You want me to beat the test and evaluate somebody? I think I could oblige. I smiled. Kanar just wanted to see my gear in action. Not someone, in fact. A triad of year 5s going for certs, and it's for their group PCT. It's their last test, and I think a bit of humility might be needed for them, as they've been on quite the tear through their exams and tests the last 2 years. One of them is actually going to get 5s on all their certs by the completion of this, if the tests hold out. As he opened the door, I began to follow him. My kit case began to float behind us on unseen force. Now let me get that. And let us get to the exam chamber. And I'll be sure to have you home by curfew. The look in his eyes was pure merriment, and we made our way down the hall towards the exam chambers. Several hours later, and a few lessons learned and taught, I was whisked to the airlock outside the ship, with the well wishes of a near-forgotten friend, and a new oath to stay in touch, at least once a decade at the very minimum. Small steps, right? As I crossed into the ship, I found myself being scanned, before Nav's face came up on a nearby screen. Welcome back, Sarge. Shall I have a drone issued to come take your case? Yeah, have it leave it in my quarters. Heading to the lift, take me to the system that needs my attention. As I set the case down and I heard an approaching drone, I made my way to the lift so that Nav could do as I had instructed. Seeing the drone carry the case off, I stepped into the lift, and again saw Nav on the panel. Yes, Nav? Sarge, I have sealed the exosuit section. I understand you would not want the little ones or anyone else aware of what is in there. The captain, LT, Nada, and Mazzy have been kept too busy to have checked or expressed interest. My confusion was clear as Nav continued on. Sarge, it's a standard Class 4 exosuit pod, but the encoding and the material of the pod are not standard by any means. With that, the image shifted to the pod in question, and I felt my nerves shudder cold throughout my body. With a vacant stare, I was finally able to give a response after blinking several times. Nav, you keep things sealed until I come back out of there, and prepare to purge the entire compartment if I call for it, no questions. Until I come out, I want full InfoSec. No scrying, no video, no audio, Nothing. Nav merely nodded before replying. Confirmed, Sarge. Please know you have just under 40 minutes until general roll call. After that, they will come looking for you within an estimated 7.75 minutes. And he was right. I needed to deal with this before the rest of them came looking, and they began to ask questions I still had no answers for. As I stepped onto the suit deck, I noticed it wasn't the standard configuration for this style of ship. It had only one launching port, instead of the 3 it should, as well as only having 2 ship bays. There should be a half dozen or more on a ship like this. And only one of the bays had a pod installed. The pods themselves being a universal standard and system that Criterion had been using since its inception. But this pod was anything but universal. And as I approached, then watched as the interface console slid out of the pod seamlessly, I knew I'd be done in less than 40 minutes. Thus I stepped up and began to confirm both my worst fears and wildest fantasies. As the console retracted and slid back into its place, I turned and began to walk out of the suit bay. As I did so, I could feel the suit link attaching to my nervous, power, and other internal systems. I could also feel a strange, familiar scent with connected equipment within that suit. Thankfully, my robes would conceal the link's presence under its folds. As the door to the suit bay closed behind me, I chose to seal it with not only a custom lock code, but chose to add a second layer of seals before I left. I made my way to the bridge, and as I entered, I smiled as I saw the captain stalking around the bridge, issuing direct yet comprehensive commands to the various drones that were manning the stations. The lieutenant was conferring with the floating images of not only Nav, but the little ones as well, who were preparing within their own prospectors. "Sarge on deck!" Masnoa shouted from her seat at the security console, while standing to attention in that same flash of movement I'd seen at my house. The entire bridge, including Captain, the LT, all the little ones' images, along with each of the drones, all snapped a salute to me. I'm not sure I'm ever going to get used to this. Carry on! And with that, all the action had resumed on the bridge as if nothing had happened. How long until we're ready to make way? The captain turned to me and immediately answered. Sarge, we can launch at your order. We only need to know where to jump to. Nav, I assume you have a recommendation for our area of operations for a shakedown run? Correct, Sarge. Forwarding details to the captain now. Got 'em. I like the way you think, Nav. Have I told you that? 151,602 times. But this is the first time in 543 years. I am pleased you have not forgotten. Captain smiled broadly. Sarge, if you will allow me? Do your duties, Captain. I'll be in the command office. Nav, tell me that is where Nada is right now. Waiting for me to arrive, I assume. He should have been on the bridge. That's where I assigned him. But I did have the feeling he would want to have a meeting as we were preparing to leave out. Nav seemed to check the internal sensors, and then just softly nodded. That is correct. Then keep me updated. And no weapon or secondary function system tests, please. We need to be a bit further out from home realm before we start toying with that. For now, just the basics. Captain looked at me and nodded in agreement, before turning back to her configurations for the testing parameters. I walked off the bridge and moved with a brisk pace to the command office. Nato sitting on the bench on the outer command room, waiting for me. Sarge. I raised my hand to stop him and pointed into my office. We walked in and he sat where I gestured. As I took my seat behind the desk, I activated a lockdown protocol so that we could speak plainly. He just nodded as the seals locked into place. You were going to say, Nada? I fixed him with a steady look. He was a dwarven longbeard, a few hundred years old. At most, with the proper magics, maybe 1,000, but he was way too spry for a dwarf of that age. Tell the truth, I hadn't quite figured him out, but my gut liked him. Only one bit of business, Sarge. The client wants to know your opinion of the equipment that has been made available to you, and if it meets with your approval. Barring any hiccups in shakedown, of course. Why not wait until we're done with the shakedown run? The client was particular about knowing your first impression. And what do you know about our client? It was time to see if I could find out a bit more. He just smiled. Nothing substantial. I am also of the belief that my contact is just another middleman. I wouldn't be shocked if there were several more layers. The client is not going to be discovered by us at this point. Then he looked around. It makes sense, though. True. If any of the major players found out that one of their number was behind a ship like this and a crew like ours, to be active within the wildlands, there'd be no end to the political nightmare. I was just a little bit bored with this, but Nada fixed me with a solid stare. It would be war, Sarge. An entire Wild Realms would be allowed to burn in it. You overstate things, Nada. Do I? How long did the Necropolis Avlin conflict rage? How many lives were allowed to be wasted? And that was on the home realm itself. Do you think they'll bat an eye at worlds burning when they can just send the World Shaper ships in afterwards? He was right. Fortunately, we had a number of ways to make sure that didn't come to pass. It was still a grim prospect. Fair point. However, for now we're running under the modified protocols. To anyone that isn't right on top of us and with really good gear, we're only going to appear like another fancy surveyor. Plenty of those about. However, once we are nice and deep into the Wild Realms, we'll look over things and see what we're comfortable with. On the way, we're going to be using the simulation and training capabilities of the Imaginary to their fullest to work on the systems that we can't advertise. Why, Sarge? But back to the question. Our client has spent a lot of money to provide this equipment, and he would like to... I cut him off by setting the rotator on the desk. His eyes widened. You don't get this, or a ship like the one we're on with just money, Nada. His stunned look gave me all the time I needed to continue. Whoever is behind this project has reach and access on a level I cannot properly quantify. And if you are the only one here that hasn't been part of our unit for centuries, I invite you to draw your own conclusions as to the implications of that. Now, I rather like you, Nada. I'd prefer not to end up having to kill you. As far as the gear goes, you may inform the client that it is satisfactory. I'll let the client know then. Thank you. smooth and unfazed by the threat. I knew light like this one. He pointed a ruddy finger at my new attire. Robes of the gun dance, neo-ancient style, bold. I was not aware that you had that level of aptitude with the dance. I am full of surprises, just like you, I imagine. I need you to report to the bridge now. I want your eyes on the shakedown and a full report afterwards. Let them know that means all of them on the bridge. Yes, sir, Sarge. He went to stand up, but stopped, looking at me, and waited. Dismissed, Nada. Thank you. Respectful of the chain of command, not really a shock from an old beard. Order and respect is a trait of the Crystal Cave folk, and dwarves in general. He just gave a curt nod and left, the doors opening as I disengaged the seals and locks. I spent the next few hours going over all the information we had for our future options. I also made a few arrangements for our next stop. Eventually, about 5 hours later, the captain messaged to inform me they had done all the testing they could at this point, and all signs were positive. Everything works just as it can be expected for factory settings. Figure a week or two of tweaking and we should be much happier with things. She was practically beaming at the success. It must have gone well indeed. Very good. Let's make way for New Earth, Outer System Gate. If I remember correct, it should be about 3 days by the cog. Just over that, Sarge. Scarp says 3.5 days about. I'll get the ship prepared to one moment. Nav reports ready to cog jump in 40 minutes. He wants to go through the ship prep one more time before the first big jump, so I better get started. Bridge out. With that, her image blinked out. Behind it, Masnova was standing, having just walked in during the captain's report. Yeah, you're going to see Cassian, aren't you? The angry scientist. That can only mean one thing. Her eyes were gleaming with curiosity and eagerness. Drop it, Mazzy. I don't have any answers for you on that front. You'll know as soon as I do. She was amused by this and didn't try to hide it. Then what about that? She gestured to my attire. You've never favored the neo-ancient style. You always said it was too complex to be reasonable in the field and too gaudy for dress duty. These were a gift, and it's exactly because I am not known for the neo-ancient style that it makes sense. I'm going to be active in the field, and we cannot risk someone thinking that I or us are part of the AD. The implications this ship presents if it gets found out? Hell no. She smiled and started to relax. Well, that makes much more sense. Should we all be dressing differently now? Perhaps I should be looking at elven court dresses? While I can't say that the thought of her in an elven court dress did not bring a smile to my face, mostly because of how ridiculous it would look. I don't think so. I'm sure I'm just being paranoid. Plus, it makes a good excuse to console myself with on having to wear this. But you know how I am about gifts. Indeed, Sarge. She tried to hide a snicker. Very poorly. Well, I will get back to the bridge. Care for dinner after we make the jump into the cog? I'll meet you in the mess. Say an hour. See you then. She left, and I mused on the details of how we would be training and drilling in the Imagi room, because we really did need to cover the various hidden systems that this ship had. and doing it in cog space just made sense. No one could see us. Therefore, by the time we arrived in the Teltechians' home system, we would be fully versed and familiar with them and aware of the capabilities of our new home among the stars, the IRV Night Rock. After dinner, I stepped into my quarters to find a young elven boy sitting on top of one of my wardrobes, swinging his legs merrily. As the door closed behind me and I could feel the room both seal and slightly disconnect from baseline reality. It seemed this child wanted a private word. To Nuoth, to the completion of your grand designs. Just a step, as you well know, trickster worm of the sister. His smile split wide. He was a legend and a terror. How are you going to explain it to the rest of them? That suit was supposedly destroyed in a suicide run on the Silver Hand, with over 300 of your fellow AD personnel killed. Of course, your whole unit was away on leave to the homerealm at the time. Most unfortunate. His smart-ass look was insufferable. That is my concern, and not yours. Why are you here? Curiosity. And to reward and celebrate your coming out of retirement. Now I'm worried. Why would you want to reward me? Because I know who you are, and what your heart says on those matters of most importance to the future. As you are so positioned to be of great importance to it. A gesture of his hand and head made his meaning clear. You? You're the client. He just looked at me and gave the slightest of nods. Now, at a few points in my long life, I have been able to see reality as it really is, past the pretenses and lies we tell ourselves and each other. War has a funny way of doing that, of letting you strip away the extraneous, till there's nothing left but the truth. And the truth was, I had never been more sure about the fact that that boy was lying and trying to do it cleverly, yet failing. A poor lie. The sister would be ashamed. I told no lie? And yet, you admit by proxy you were intending to deceive. His eyes narrowed, but a smile split his face. Still sharp, Sergeant Hahn. No. I am not your client, nor am I the one who has planted an agent of some sort on your ship. He held his hand up, and the words of my next outburst froze in my throat. We really do not have time for that, and no, I do not know who or how. I am just aware of the fact that someone who isn't who they say they are is on this ship, and they are serving a master unknown. I encourage you to discover who and figure out this mystery before it brings you great doom. With this, my debt to you is paid. Debt? Debt to me? He just faded away, and my room returned to the way it was, just in time for a knock on the door. Turning around and opening the door, I saw the captain, handing me an infotome. All of our shakedown data, thoughts, and ideas collated and organized for you, Sarge. I know you didn't ask for it before morning, but I wanted to get it done. Have a good night, Sarge. And with that, she turned and headed down to her own and the lieutenant's quarters, and seemed completely unaware of what had just transpired within my quarters. Closing the door and holding the tome, turning around and leaning against it, I only had one thought racing through my mind. By the family, what have I got my people into? I looked over the massive weapon that was on the rack as the angry scientist Cassian was preparing to go over all the features he had crafted into it. Cassian was pointing with that little stick of his at the pieces and parts with a pride and eagerness as he was setting everything up, softly preparing for his presentation. I couldn't blame him. I'd given him the rough specs on the weapon and my requirements for its features and capabilities over 1,000 years ago, and he, by his own admission, had only finished it a handful of decades ago. He'd probably spent another decade on this very presentation, so I was going to let him have his moment. He had most definitely earned it. Sergeant, as you requested, you'll have a single 4-round burst and full auto fire modes, 4 acceleration modes, 2 for atmospheric and 2 for vacuum use. One of them will be for range and accuracy, of course, and the other for damage and destruction. The light in his eyes made it clear he was only getting warmed up. You'll have up to 600 rounds a minute. You're looking at roughly 5 miles in atmo, 15 in vacuum. Baseline for the damage mode, I mean. 10 times that for the distance mode, roughly. Environments vary. He was going to make me ask about the important parts, or he was going to go into very great detail about the other features of the weapon. With a barrel length of 5 foot, you're going to be able to hit whatever you aim at, and with 3-inch diameter, 5-inch long slugs, whatever you hit is not going to be the same after, if it even still exists. The mass conversion to plasmatic explosive force on impact shouldn't leave much behind, if you're using that feature, of course. Then I assume the Procry Matter slug and propellant replicator did work out after all. How many materials do I have access to? How many projectiles am I going to be able to reconstruct, and how fast? This hypothetical system had been an obsession of Cassian's for years before I met him, and the heuristic I was able to share with him was able to let him close the gap to his goal. This weapon system was his repayment of my assistance. A masterpiece of Chrystech and Teltech fused. You know it! You'll have a total of 9 round materials. Steel, alloy iron, alloy moon steel, alloy meteor iron, alloy star metal, 2 separate forms of crystal substrate. You'll be able to maintain a full fire rate with only needing roughly 6 seconds for a full 60 round clip reconfiguration. The nano-adaptive munition system will be able to keep up with fire rate without issue. It will also be able to customize the type of round created via preloaded parameters, with some ability to adapt on the fly. So, as long as the power requirements can be met, this thing is good to go. But of course, that's your problem. Yes it is. And unless they count differently in Teltechian, that's only 8 materials, Cassian. I was smiling. I knew he had something to show. Yes, the final one is a bit special. Let me show you. He slid open the compartment that held the base storage, showing where the 8 other solid material slugs were, with a 9th chamber sealed with a special cap. Instead of converting into explosive plasmatic force, this will convert all extra energies into more of the matter that the round is alloyed to. That means every time you hit some, it will spread around the target and seal them, and then thicken with each additional round. A standard 4-round burst should cover and seal any size Class 3 target, and only give minor kinetic damage transfer. Of course, you can configure the material to then explode depending on the settings you input. The only problem is it takes 10 seconds a slug to create. That means 5 minutes for a full clip. It also takes 20 times the energy to operate and produce that ammunition. That is more than acceptable, Cassian. You've outdone yourself on this account. But what of the celestial augments? And what is the alloy material? Is it uniform against the other materials? He was beaming. Yeah, uniform T4 uni alloys. You'll have full augmentation abilities, including your celestial energies. T4 uni? That's impressive. Where the hell did you get the materials for that? Cassian looked a bit hesitant, standing behind the weapon rack beginning to pack it up for transport back to the Night Rock. It was the oddest thing. A gentleman contacted us and sold off 30 Type 4 unis. More than enough for the base munition stock and all the various systems in the weapon. With a little bit left over, to be fair. And for far less for market value. More I think about it, way less. I was so overjoyed with the acquisition I didn't think to question it at the time. It was still an extraordinary amount of money, but I owed it to you. This was a bothersome development, as it smelled of outside interference. It's fine. Just tell me you're still your paranoid self and have something more than that to fill me in with. At this he smiled, and tossed a small, hand-sized infotome to me. Of course, Sarge. I'm just glad you're not mad at me. I didn't show anything about it to anyone. I wouldn't do that. They were never on the ship. This was just a direct transfer via cog. Activating the infotome and looking at the images stored within, and taking a moment to look at the odd man who had made this deal, I noticed the knots in his braids. Then I noticed the room he sat in. I made a decision at that point. I sent a signal to Navi to prepare to make best possible speed back to the home realm. And I stood, quite the rush, startling the codesmith as he was going about his work. Cassian, you've done great. Now, get that packed and sent to my ship. After that, pack up yourself. You need to relocate and go to ground. 5 years. Don't break cover for 5 years, my friend. I hope I'm being paranoid, but there may be some problems. Don't worry. I'll reach out if I can give an all clear before that. Yes, of course, Sarge. How bad did I just mess things up? He was nervous. Reasonably so. This project had been of the top security and importance to me when I brought it to him all those years ago. But, for once, he hadn't messed things up. Clumsy he may be, but he was loyal and a good man. You didn't. You did everything right. There are just some other matters at play that may be intersecting. It appears someone just left me an invitation, and it would be rude if I did not accept it. With that, I got up and made my way to the dock, and knew my weapon system would be there before I was. Now, it was time to go to work. It looked like there was a reviver to hunt. Thus, a tally to even from many brothers lost. We had more than enough time before we needed to start choosing our first mission for the client. We just had to make this quiet and quick. The unit would be less than happy about this, but would make this happen once I made my case. You see, the revivers were like ghosts in the fog. Many say they don't even exist. However, I was sure that this one was not making some sort of mistake by giving me such detailed information via the imagery and recording he had sent to Cassian. Thus, I knew where he'd sent the Chris from, and it was the Fortress. And if it came to it, it'd be a good test of the new gear. A few minutes later, and I was sitting in my office on the ship, and was dealing with a very irate security officer. They aren't real, Sarge. You have to get over this obsession. Mazzy was actually yelling at me. Oh boy. The revivers have never been real. You are not going to embark on a mission operation on the home realm to just try and find a ghost. I will not allow it. It's too risky. For all of us, Sarge. To be fair, she was not saying anything that the rest of the crew didn't also echo in some degree. I knew I was in the minority in believing in the existence of the revivers. But I was privy to things that none of the rest of them were, and I knew what I had seen over the ages. But there was a better way to prove my point as for the need to us going. As she stood across the desk from me in my office, she stared at me. Her eyes were furious, but there was a searching, pleading in them as well, looking for logic and hoping that I had not been totally lost to a form of madness. Well, time to make my case. Mazzy, how much is a Type 4 Unicryst? How much would a lot of 30 go, if you had to guess? Her face scrunched, taking on a pondering look as she thought about it. It was obvious she didn't like where it was going, because these were very large numbers. Large enough to make my point. One of them would be about 4.2 million standard gold. So a lot of 30 would be, what, 120? Maybe 100 million at the bare minimum? I don't get what point that has, Sarge. The system we just picked up, the weapon system for my suit, I waved off the interruption before she could make it, used most of that material, and it was only traded for 3 normal Anis and about 5 million standard gold. That's only about 8.5 million Mazzy. For 120 million worth of very hard to refine Unicryst. Who else or what else could let it go for so little? And then let an image of themselves just happen to be captured and fall into my lap? I lifted the infotome out of my pocket and tossed it to her. She caught it with those cat-like reflexes she always had, flipped it on, looked at it, looked at me, and looked back at the infotome. Her eyes and face softening as she realized we were going to be going. She understood the same as I, even if it was a falsehood. Someone was trying to fake being one of the revivers to provoke some sort of response. We needed to check this out. That amount of money at play required at least some investigation. She looked up at me, face softer, and softly asked, "Are you absolutely sure you've properly figured out where in the home realm we need to go then? Even if it's in lawless territory, our presence with this ship could cause issue if we are not both surgical and efficient." Now this was the question I could answer. Yes, Mazzy, I am. I actually know the place personally. Her face scrunched up, looking at me oddly, head starting to cock to the side. I'll explain later. Been there a few times over the ages. However, I need you to inform the crew and get us on our way. Have no fear. I'll have a full order of operations for each of you within a few hours. I am not cutting corners on this. This is going to be run just like any other operation. I might have an obsession, but it is not an obsession to the point of madness. I promise. Yes, sir. You know we are with you. Thank you for explaining. Of course. Masnoa? Dismissed. Dinner after we jump. She smiled broadly. Of course, Sarge. You can explain what this weapon is then. The ship was quiet as I made my way into my office, with only the steady hum of engines vibrating throughout the ship to be heard, soft and comforting. We were still almost a day from the home realm, and all the preparations for our operation had already been finished almost a full day ago, so the crew was enjoying a bit of downtime before things got serious. Deep in cog space, we had little else to do that wasn't already arranged or superfluous to need. Nav, of course, was using this time to continue to tweak and tune the ship, so that he could inevitably save the day by pulling out just that much more from the ship than normal at the right time. He was the best at what he did, and as I passed one of his drones, a projection of his face appeared. Sarge, all systems are nominal, as everyone seems to be in quarters except for yourself, and looks to be for at least the next 7 hours. May I ask if you could also remain wherever you are heading? I intend to perform several tests of atmospheric and energy. Like I said, Nav never stopped working. 7 hours? Yeah, I can do that for you. I'm heading to my office. Give me 5 and I'll be there. Appreciated, Sarge. As soon as I had entered the outer room of my office, the command chamber from where one could observe and coordinate all the operations of the ship, the doors slid shut, and I could hear and feel the pressure and energy seals activate. Nav's voice chimed in immediately. Seals all set, and beginning the test, Sarge. Setting comms to direct contact mode to prevent any potential bleed over. Thank you. I'll ring if I need anything. Are there any other systems going to be going offline for your tests? Negative, Sarge. Tests beginning now. Nav out. That done, I walked towards my office, only to stop when I saw the back of an intruder standing in my office. He was tall and looked as if he were examining my desk. As I took the beater coil off my waist, he spoke, and the wind was driven from my lungs. It's been too long, Han. You still do go by Han, yes? With that, the man turned, and I nearly sank to a knee before he continued. None of that. I have this fine bottle of Unifused Cider I need help in drinking. Farm bottle, special vintage. I could see now that he'd been setting out a pair of glasses and had a decanter of a shifting liquid, shining and devouring light in a dance in the bottle. I recovered and made my way to the seat behind my desk and nudged the empty glass towards my guest. Of course, I'm not on operation time right now. Be happy to drink with you. He filled our glasses and sat across the desk from me. We raised our glasses together. He started. To Criterion, the Realms, and to you, Han. You've really outdone yourself this time. I raised my own glass in return. To Criterion, the Realms, and, yeah, double for me. The chuckle was honest, if clipped from my guest. To the family, I finished. The family, was his reactive reply as we toasted and drank. The energy that was contained in this drink rushed through me, and I could feel the excess being expelled from my eyes as light, just as my guest's eyes glowed. The smooth burn of this fine spirit made my face warm and brought on a single cough from the both of us, followed by a low whistle of enjoyment. This is mighty fine indeed. My thanks. But what brings you to me in such a impromptu fashion? For a moment he seemed unsure of my meaning, before a sly grin crossed his face. Oh, well, this is the first chance I've had to catch up with you after all. When you retired, you went dark, and I thought I should respect that. But you sat in a test at Trannis about, a week ago? News of that made it to my ears, so I felt you would not take offense at my arrival. I was a bit startled by that he had heard I had been at Trannis. But he was who he was. This is fair. But why visit at all? I saw something cross my guest's face. Pain. Or so I thought. Before I could confirm what I had seen, though, it was gone. Han, do you think I'd miss the chance to congratulate you on going independent finally? I can see why you were in the dark so long if this is what you were working on all the time. He gestured around. Surveyor model. Common enough, even in this industrial configuration. But I bet you've tricked it out with everything you could think of, right? The hull alone must have taken you years. I said nothing as I slowly took another drink, letting him continue as the fire burned my throat. Let me guess. You parlayed the materials from the house as part of your retirement package. They had an eye on you for promotion, you know. At that, I almost choked. Only saved by the fact that my glass was empty. It was a shock that my guest was unaware of the details of my retirement, and as he finished filling my glass once more, I managed a response. Did they now? I was doing far too well then. Lamentations of the Father, first book, second chapter. My guest's chuckle were almost louder than my recitation. The worst thing I ever did was let them promote me. He finished along with me. Yes, your name came up a few times from what I understand. But that's not my area. You know how these things are. Politics. It makes everything more difficult. I caught a subtle shift in his tone. So, is that why you are here? His look was somber, but serious. He reached into his vest and pulled out a strip of a uniform and tossed it on the desk between us. On it was a complex set of braided knots. I knew what it was, and I went still. I know what you are on your way to do, Han, and I'd ask you to not. The blood in my veins, already warm with the liquor, switched to fire. Excuse me? Are you out of your mind? They are the enemy. They cost us nothing, Han. I was struck silent. How? How can you? Because they did not cause the sky tear, Han. Of course they did. Criterion doesn't have anything that matches anything that opened that tear. No one knows what happened, unless you're saying that you do. Old friend, that is exactly what I am saying. Do you not think if it had been the fault of these revivers, I would not have made each of them pay? It was a tragedy, but one that neither could be avoided or prevented. The word struck hard as I began to realize what he was meaning. Wait, you knew? Only that something was going to happen, Han, not what or when. His tone took the heat from my blood. We lost so many. I know. I lost a son. I could only stare, dumbstruck as he continued. He took the knotted scrap of uniform back. They lost even more by proportion. Where we had the house guard and the advanced division to draw from to reconstitute our forces, that was it for them. Now, they're just technical advisors and research assets for people who can afford them. They're not a threat anymore. In fact, they're quite the opposite at this point. I was finally able to gather my wits and respond, waving about the ship, gesturing. How did you know about... About what you were intending to do? Han, the commander of the House Advanced Division, may be a master of all things clandestine, but he doesn't hold that skill set in exclusivity. His smile was warm and filled with pride. His mother still has a few things to teach him. Fair enough, but even with what you present here, I can't turn away. Why? He fixed me with a solid look. They have interfered with things they should not have even known about. I have to plug such a leak before I can risk working in the Wild Realms without a net. Do you not agree? His look was serious, and he did consider my words before responding. What did they do? I reached into my desk and tossed him the infotome with the images on it. 30 Type 4 unis, all for less than 10% of what it should. Sold to an indie doing work for me, just as he needed such rare materials. He looked at the infotome with a scowl. I see. That would be enough to warrant a look. I'll give you that. His face went neutral as he looked at the rest of the images. And I can see why you have such a sense of urgency. Still, you are going to need to refrain from this. Less because I am asking you to, and more because this is a setup. I only nodded for him to continue, and listened closely as he explained. As I said, politics makes everything harder. When financial interests are likewise entwined, doubly so. Sarge, Nav's voice chimed into my office, where I now sat alone with the decanter of drink and the glasses, my own still half full. Yes, Nav. Report. Test complete. All systems are back to normal function. I am unsealing all internal doors. Full access to ship is now available. Thanks. What is our current ETA to home realm? Approximately 14 hours. Excellent. Once we arrive, I want you to engage in Scatter Pattern Moonbeam 7. Sir? The operation is off, Nav. Upon review and with a cooler head, I think someone is trying to derail our client by derailing us. Me. By derailing me. Nav's voice was a bit softer in his response. Confirmed. Moonbeam 7, sir. Shall I inform the rest of the crew? No. We still may be going into action. We just need to be anywhere that isn't near where we were going while we figure this out. I've got some feelers out there to confirm or deny my suspicions. But it's still better to stay ready than not. I'll brief everyone as soon as I know more. Aye, sir. Nav out. With that, silence now again reigned in my office, and I contemplated the bullet we had just dodged. Whoever had set this up had nearly gotten me to crash into the middle of some high-level backroom talks between some various power players. While my guest failed to illuminate me directly to any of the participants, the implications were clear enough. I had nearly caused an inter-realms incident, one that could have seen us fleeing for our lives from not only the Hunters, the Dragon Knights, but even the Expedus fleet. As I drained my glass and felt the rush of its contents flow through me, I silently thanked my guest for his visit again. A moment later, I heard Nada enter the outer command room and make his way to my office. He looked at the glasses, and then to me. Having guests while in cog space, that's a minor feat. I nodded to the now empty chair. Nada sat down, and I filled the other glass for him, as I began to explain what had just been passed on to me. One does not exactly say no to a visit from Cartha Skychild, especially when he brings a fine bottle of spirits, and the foreknowledge to escape a trap meant to ensnare and kill us all.